And it's your boy Pop Pop. So, and no, I'm not wearing a shirt. So, if any of you are offended that I'm not wearing a shirt, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My room is over 80 degrees, and the air conditioning is pumping out ice cold 55-degree air into the room. But the sun is so powerful. The sun is so powerful that it almost feels like I'm getting a sunburn right through the window. So there's a lot going on in the world. Let's hang out and talk about it. So Shalom, how are you? So it's 82 degrees outside, and it's 82 degrees inside my room with the air conditioner blasting 55-degree cold air, because the sun is like a fall sun. It's really low in the sky, and it actually feels like I'm getting a sunburn right through the window. So I'm reading the news. It says electrical engineer warns that the electrical grid failure is just ticking away. You know, because of all the electric cars being added to the grid and air conditioning and all of that other stuff. So Will Smith gets divorced. Now that's a big surprise, because Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith had an open marriage. So he was down low. He was down low with the guys, and Jada was doing her thing, and they got their son wearing dresses. So is that a surprise? You know, all these people, they fight against family values, and then when the stuff hits the fan, you know, the stuff hits the fan, and they're all like shocked. They're all shocked that things didn't work out. So, and Will Smith says his divorce was his failure. The founder of one of the religious networks, Pat Robertson, has passed away. So a whole bunch of stuff going on. So Toby Keith has been diagnosed with stomach cancer. If I could give a shout out to Toby Keith, I would tell Toby Keith to eat as much cabbage as you can. They did a study with prisoners, and they found out that cabbage is the plant that repairs your stomach. And it says right in the Bible, it says God gave the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations. That's right in the Bible. Beets are good for your liver. Celery is good for your kidneys. And if you have any kind of blood problem, dark leafy greens are good, because the chlorophyll is similar to the structure of your red blood cells. So, with me dealing with the skin cancer and the my Lance Armstrong down south, and the issue with my blood under a microscope looks perfect until you get to what I call a bad blood neighborhood, and then my blood has like crumpled up black crap in it, and like I said, it gets into a bad neighborhood, and I don't know what's been attacking it or whatever, but technically that's a form of leukemia. And my hands are quite pale, and there's just a residue of blood around the edges of the fingers, and then everything is white, and the veins are blue. You know, I check my oxygen uh, saturation every day, and lately it's been at the bare minimum. It's been around 90% saturation. You 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 check that with a pulse oximeter. They're very cheap now, $15. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse for not checking it. My blood pressure was like that of a 17-year-old boy this morning. So, in any case, they're still arguing as to whether this plane that crashed in Virginia was SHOT down, or whether the pilot went too high and ran out of oxygen and passed out. Now, I have flown a Cessna, and to try and get a Cessna airplane up to 34,000 feet, fam, it doesn't happen, because it's a prop airplane, single engine prop airplane. And if you were to nose that airplane up, eventually it would just stall out and drop like a brick. And it would do that far before 34,000 feet. So something isn't kosher. The plane flew into restricted area over the WH, and it was going from south to north, and then all of a sudden it turned around and started headed back to Sleepy Joe's house. And I believe they knocked it out of the sky, because when the F-16s were scrambled, they literally caused a sonic boom. So that means that the F-16s went to Mach in defense of Sleepy Joe's Washington abode. So, and Jamie Foxx apparently had a stroke after a blood clot after getting the jab from the cough. And people are saying pray for him, but he made a fantastic blasphemy when he said all honor and praise goes to his Lord and Savior Barack Obama. So I'm wondering if Jamie Foxx has reached out to Barack Obama for blessings and healings. I personally would be too afraid to get on a stage and blaspheme like that. I had a boss who was fighting with cancer, and he got very frustrated. He was ill. He didn't feel good. We were out in a parking lot one day, and he looked up at the sky and he said, "God, you son of a," like that. In any case, he got a hole in his nose, And what they did was they grafted skin from his arm to his nose to cover the hole. And he spent like 2 or 3 days with his arm up in the same position that he had shaken it at Almighty God. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa. Because he was a very blasphemous man. He literally kicked me out of his house on Christmas Day for talking about the Lord Jesus Christ years ago. So this one-legged dancer gets the golden buzzer at America's Got Talent. Those are the beautiful stories that you need to look for in this day and age. You know, to seek out a little bit of beauty in this veil of tears, as my mother would call it. The crazy guy Ted Kaczynski, who sent all those letter BOMBs to people, and he capped 3 people and crippled a couple of dozen others. He's passed away in prison. And years ago, my brother had taken on that look of being a nomad and the crazy hair. And my brother invited me to this fabulous breakfast at the Forest Diner in Ellicott City. And you got these obscene portions of scrambled eggs and big fluffy pancakes and crispy bacon and a delicious cup of coffee. And my brother sat down across from me. I was in a business suit. I never went with the thing of dressing like a rag picker because I knew that eventually this country would go lower and lower and lower as our values and everything sunk into the gutter. And when I went to school, I was supposed to go to one of the rich elite schools. And I didn't have the money. I didn't have the clothes at the time and the money to follow the other kids who were going to school in Lincoln Continentals and Cadillacs. And I had a 64 Ford Falcon convertible. And when I parked it, I had to put a brick under the tire to keep the car from rolling away. And one day, I called my mother and I said, I left my parking brake out in the street. Can you go get it? Meaning go get the brick out of the street. So in any case, I had an African-American girlfriend, which back then, interracial was literally against the law. And when I went to graduate, they would not let she and I dance together or go to the prom. So she went with this African-American guy, and I went with this whiny, red-nosed girl, Melissa or Melinda. One of those girls that constantly has a tissue up against her nose and is just dreadful, never finds anything happy and never smiles. And her mother made me buy the $155 grand package for the graduation ceremony with all of these pictures of she and I. And then the mother kept the pictures, didn't let me have one picture of what I had paid for. And it was her way of proving that her plain Jane daughter had gotten a date for the prom. Most miserable night of my life. You know, watching my girlfriend dance with another guy, and I'm with this just atrocious girl. And so, in any case, the other kids went to the elite school, and I went to the hippie school, and where everybody was doing 420 and hanging out in raggedy clothes and driving VW Beetles to school and all that other stuff. And I wouldn't have any part of that. I always wore a shirt and tie or a sports shirt and jacket, you know. And a lot of people thought I taught at the school instead of attending at the school. And I never let people talk to me in a nasty way either, whether it was another kid or a teacher or anything like that. Never. So one teacher used to call me by my last name. I said, Mr. So-and-so, if you're going to call me by my last name, you have to call me Mr. Or, your other choice is to call me respectfully by my first name. I don't call you by your last name. His name was Mr. Kadatsky. I said, I wouldn't just call you Kadatsky. That'd be disrespectful. And I don't expect you to call me by my last name, without a Mr. in front of it. And once that was established, it was okay. He was a miserable teacher. They took all of the good teachers and they took them over to the high dollar high school, and they gutted the school that I went to, and it was a shame. But they took all of the really good teachers and they put them over at Walt Whitman and put the crummy teachers in my high school. I have to shift my weight for a second. Being bedridden is terrible because you get like dry skin on your back and all of that. And a mattress is not supposed to be slept in 24/7. So, but in any case, getting back to the meeting with my brother, he had all this crazy hair going on, and he hadn't showered in a few days, and his clothes were all tattered. And he told me, he said, I walked the railroad tracks in my neighborhood, and my neighbors were all afraid of me. And I told him, you know what? I said, if a child comes up missing in your neighborhood or something goes on, you'll be the first one that they come to is the weird guy with the crazy hair and, walking the railroad tracks and scaring your neighbors. So I was just disgusted with the whole thing. And I got up from this beautiful breakfast, and the last thing I said to him, I said, and cut your damn hair. You're going around looking like Kramer. So, in case my sister called me a couple of weeks later, and she said, you never guess what? Your brother cut his hair. Well, like, so what? The guy's 30 years old, and he doesn't know to cut his hair, brush his teeth, or to take a shower, whatever, because he's rebelling. And, people say, well, you're rebelling. Yeah, you're repelling people because they don't want to get near all that stink and everything. And he worked for a repair shop, and he said, well, the customers weren't getting good value for the repairs. because the boss charged too much money. And my brother was a really good mechanic, but he did some really stupid things. You know, one guy came in a Chrysler. Hey, Dion. One guy came in a Chrysler, wanted his air conditioning fixed, so my brother fixed it at no extra cost, and he put a little flip switch on the dash, under the dash, and he said, when you want to use the air conditioning, flip this switch and turn the air conditioner on manually. Well, the customer went to the boss and he said, well, you owe me an air conditioner and you owe me a new dashboard that doesn't have a hole drilled into it with this toggle switch, because that's not what I asked for. I asked for a factory repair. So the dealership had to put new air conditioning in the car, and they had to put a new dash into this old wreck of a car because the customer had been a jerk, but he insisted on having what he paid for. Maybe he wanted to sell the car, you don't know. But in any case, my brother didn't do what he was told. He was told to fix the air conditioner so that the customer could be charged for it. And he did this little cheesy freebie fix, and the customer didn't appreciate it. So he put his dealership at risk, and he ended up losing his job. And he couldn't understand that. You know, he was all, I said, well, you know, you weren't told to do that. You were told to do a factory fix on a car at a car dealership, and you put this cheesy little toggle switch in, and that's not what the customer had ordered. So I go to the shop, and the men are all chasing each other like little girls, flicking each other in the butt with shop towels. And I told him, I said, you know, if the customers came in and your shop was clean and you had like those white technician jackets on and you met the customer with the clipboard and you really found out what they wanted done and you fixed the car properly and then you vacuumed the car and you wiped the windows down so that the customer thought they really got good value, then it's not up to you what your boss charges. But you come in here and the one man is using a push broom and acting like an idiot. He's got the push broom upside down, doing the floor with the wooden side of the push broom down and the bristles facing up. As a customer, that makes you think that the person has got some sort of an issue. And of course you think that whatever you're paying is going to be too much, you know. And I went through that with mechanics when I worked at the Dodge dealership and I detailed their cars. I told the mechanics, I said, any customer that you want their car vacuumed and you want their windows cleaned, I will do it for the sake of the dealership gratis on my time and my money and everything. And the mechanics were like, oh, we're Chrysler mechanics. We don't vacuum cars. You know, that's a menial thing, you know. And they're putting me down in offering to do it. Oh, we don't vacuum cars and we don't wipe the windshields down. We fix the motor and slam the hood and go on to the next car. And the dealership went out of business. But I told them, I said, that'd be the simplest thing to delight your customer. And they're like, well, we're not into delighting anybody. We're mechanics. We fix the car, slam the hood, wipe the fingerprints off the hood, back it on out, move on to the next car. You know, that kind of thinking. And it was a shame. And I told him, I said, well, I wish I had the money to buy the dealership And the mechanics were like, well, we would all quit if you told us to vacuum the car out and wipe the window down. We're mechanics, you know, very arrogant in everything. And that's been the whole problem with America's business as a whole. During my lifetime, I've run 5 different companies and run them efficiently and well during very hard times. And you get these guys, and it amazed me about the garbage business when when I would supervise the men, I would videotape the men working on the truck, and I would use a stopwatch to time the men. And at a meeting, I told the men, I said, if you dump the trash cans first, go to the curb, pick up the bags, drop the bags in the truck, you've got 1.5 trips to the truck, and it will knock, 5 or 6 seconds off of each house that you pick up. But the men, they come to the curb, they pick up the bags, go to the truck, pick up the cans, go to the truck, go back and put the cans back. So you have 1.5 trips versus 3 trips. And they don't want to be told anything other than dump the trash in the truck and pull the handle and not think about how they're loading the truck or anything like that. That would save them an hour and a half of labor and get them home early. And I went through so much agony with the trash companies where I would have sandwiches for the men, and every day at my own expense, I filled an ice chest up with ice, and I had cheap soda pop that I could afford for the men to come up to my pickup truck and get a sandwich and a soda pop, if they were hungry or thirsty. And then I filled bottles with cool water because one summer was just brutal. And I filled bottles up with cold water so that the men could mist themselves with the cold water and cool down. Never got thank you, kiss my ass, go to hell, or anything from anybody. And as a matter of fact, the safety officer with the company said, well, bologna and cheese is not very healthy. I don't know why you can't give the men something more healthy. I'm like, lady, because that's all I could afford. That's all I'm eating today is a bologna sandwich. I could have a steak and potato for lunch if I wasn't spending my money on my men, And so they got another supervisor, and of course he came down from a cloud from heaven and all of this other baloney, treated the men like dogs, called them boy, I hated that when I was young, doing a menial job, being called boy. The last time I was called boy was when I worked at the Dodge dealership detailing cars. And here I was back then, 55 years old, and I heard this voice behind me, are they open, boy? Because I was waxing a car that I wanted to shine up and get a little bit more money out of. I turned around and it was this old African American guy in a straw hat and one of those Hawaiian shirts. He said, are they open, boy? And fully understanding that that's the way it was between my generation back then. If you did a certain job, you were called boy. So I wasn't offended at the guy. If I shined shoes or picked up garbage or washed cars, that was the way it was back in the 50s and all, was that you got called boy. If you pumped gas, they would say, hey boy, check my tires. Hey boy, check my oil. So I didn't get offended at it, but I thought how how cool he called me boy. I haven't heard that in a number of years. And I turned to him. I said, yes, they're open. The dealership just doesn't look like it's open. And then I got the idea to go out at my expense and get orange and white paint and go over all of those safety poles and the white bricks around the parking lot lights and stuff to freshen the place up and make it look open. And so one afternoon, this this man in a Lincoln Navigator, great big truck, he had a heart attack or a diabetic attack or something. He passed out at the wheel and he plowed into a Honda, which plowed into my freshly painted gate, which plowed into my Jeep Wrangler that I had just waxed and put up at the top of the lot for sale. And then the Lincoln Navigator came charging through the parking lot and hit one of the orange poles that I had just freshly painted before making its way into the shop, almost slaughtering some of the mechanics. And so the boss turns around and he tells me, I don't want you to paint another thing because everything that you painted has gotten hit by a car, as if it was my fault that the man passed out at the wheel. And the boss was serious. He said, I don't want you to paint another thing because literally everything that I had painted and freshened up got hit by a car and plowed into something else. But that's just being a baby because, you know, we all know that circumstance has nothing to do with anything. And it just showed the lack of maturity on behalf of the boss man. But when when Barack Obama consolidated the U.S. auto industry in order to save it, which he did, I give him credit for that, because Bush was not going to help out the U.S. auto industry. He was just going to let it go. And that way, when wartime came again, we'd have no way of producing our own stuff to defend ourselves. So Obama did save the U.S. auto industry, but he consolidated the dealerships and our dealership got closed. Our Dodge dealership went to the local Chrysler dealership, as well as the Jeep dealership went to the local Chrysler guy. And so my boss got jealous, and one day he went over, phooey. I gotta get my back scratcher, get my circulation going. One day my boss goes over to the Chrysler dealership, which had this street going, a back alley next to the Chrysler dealership. And my Dodge dealership boss is going to go spy on the Chrysler dealership. And so long story short, he takes his Dodge Avenger, which is a nice car, but it's not the biggest car. And he goes over to the Chrysler dealership to spy on his adversary. And the guy from the Chrysler dealership takes a big old Chrysler 300 or Fifth Avenue or something, and he drives up to my boss's car and gets nose to nose with the car. And so it forces my boss to have to back down his driveway out onto the highway. And so I'm sitting at my sales desk back at the Dodge dealership, and boss comes in through the door and he's sniffling and crying like a little child. And being used to all the drama with him, I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Tell Papa about it. What's wrong?" He goes, "I went over to the other dealership, and and Fred's son took a big old Chrysler and pushed my car out into the highway." I said, "He pushed your car?" "He didn't push your car. He drove up nose to nose with your car and he backed you down into the highway. He didn't push your car." And I said, "I'll tell you one thing. If I had been in that Dodge Avenger on public property, on the street next to the dealership, and the Joker tried to push my car, he'd have had to push it through all the way to the back bumper, would be the only thing left going out on that highway. Because I would be daggone if I would have moved for the guy, because you weren't doing anything wrong." And this guy was a total little kid. Everything I tried to do to help him, he said no to. See, his father had built the dealership and given it to him as his most responsible son, God help him. The other son was living in the local motel, hooked on drugs. So this guy got the car dealership. So when Obama took the Dodge away from everything, when he took Dodge away from everything, I called Mitsubishi, because there wasn't a local Mitsubishi dealership. And I arranged for Mitsubishi to come and have a meeting with my boss about making our dealership Mitsubishi. So he called him back. He never met with the people and he canceled the meeting. So there was a cell phone company needed a cell tower in the area, and we had this great big tall Dodge sign, and I invited the cell company to put a antenna on top of our Dodge sign and pay us, monthly income. He asked that. So there was a coffee shop called Mud Coffee, and Mud wanted a local coffee shop. So we had a little outbuilding that would be perfect for a drive-up coffee shop. So I invited Mud to come and talk to us about having a coffee shop. Could you imagine the business that would have brought in? People coming in to get coffee, and they see the used cars all around the lot, and the mechanics would be able to walk over and get coffee and donuts and sandwiches. It would have been perfect, but he asked that deal. So I was like, "Well, I can't help you. I can't help you with anything anymore." And I went ahead and left. And then he sold the dealership to another used car dealer, but totally straight up business, no flair or no creativity or anything, not even a nice waiting room for the guests to sit in while their cars are being fixed, any of that stuff. But so I got nothing for my effort. The shop manager took credit when I called all of the former Dodge customers and I said, "Now, we're not a Dodge dealership anymore, but you can still get your oil changes here. You can get your favorite mechanic to still do your oil change and your service work, because Dodge stuck us with all of the parts. They didn't buy back the parts." So I went through hundreds of pages of old customers, and I had a green pen and a red pen, and most people were very nice about the phone call. Only a few were obnoxious, and I would take my red pen and I'd put a red dot next to that name, meaning don't call the people back. But when I sold Chryslers, I was creative. I did like they did in the 1940s when they sold cars door to door. I would take my demo, and for example, I walked up to this one house, had a Lincoln Mark III, so they like big cars, and I always got a Fifth Avenue or a Cordoba back then was the car to have. And so uh, I I pull up to these people's house in this gold Fifth Avenue, gold on gold, gorgeous car, and I knock on the door and I said, I'm with so and so Chrysler Plymouth. I wanted to leave you my business card. I saw the Lincoln. I'd be interested in taking it as a trade-in. And so the wife comes to the door and she goes, I don't want no stinking Chrysler. But the guy, being pragmatic, he's like, well, how much would you give me on a trade-in? You know. So I'm like, well, first things first, let's see if you like this Fifth Avenue. So I took him on a test drive. I went back to the dealership driving his Lincoln, got a deposit check, and they took the Fifth Avenue down to Florida. And that was selling cars door to door, which I did several times, and I got criticized because the company said, well, you need to be on the floor pacing back and forth in our empty dealership waiting for somebody who's going to come through the door that's never going to show up, you know. So I was like, well, I'll just take my briefcase and paperwork and I'll go find me some customers. And I had my mistakes during the time that I was at the dealership. They weren't really my mistakes. I sold this Arab guy who had just came to America this beautiful Dodge conversion van, and it had cruise control, which back then was a big deal. And long story short, what the guy did was he turned the cruise control on the highway, and then he went back in the van to do something like get a cup of coffee or fix a sandwich or something. He thought that cruise control meant the van was going to drive itself. And so the van went along the highway, and when somebody slowed down, it plowed into a whole bunch of cars. And he came back angry at us, you know, because he set the cruise control. He did what he thought he was right. But then he got up out of the captain's chair and went to the back of the van and let the van plow into a whole bunch of cars. So at that point, when we had more people come into the country who didn't understand English or anything like that, I made sure that they understood everything about the vehicle. If they spoke Spanish, I told them in Spanish, you know, about the vehicle. And that came in handy too, because a girl came in to buy a car, and I never cheated anybody. I want to say that up front. My deals were always like, it is what it is. I'll help you buy a car. I don't cheat anybody, and I don't want to be disrespected, and I'm not going to disrespect you. But this father and daughter, they go into speaking Spanish about how they're going to work the salesman down on the price of the car. And of course, I'm sitting there listening to every word that they're saying. They're saying that they're going to go around the car and look very carefully at it. And maybe they'll find a scratch on the car and they'll demand a discount for finding the scratch on the car. So I told them, I said, look, My cars don't have scratches, and they don't need to have scratches. So if you're looking for a dented, scratched up car, I'll sell you a used car and I'll sell it to you fair. But straight up, we need some communication as far as what our expectations are, because I don't cheat anybody, but I don't want anybody scratching my car so that they can claim a discount. And what you do in that case is, if somebody were to scratch the car, you don't make the deal on that car. You say, okay, I will get you another new car that doesn't have a scratch and we'll make that deal. But you don't make the deal on the car that they scratched. Customers had all sorts of game that they run on you. They'll come in to look at a car and they'll almost blow the engine up, over revving it to see if the engine will hold together. I mean, come on, fam. If you're buying a car, why would you do that to a car that you're going to buy? Almost blow the motor out of it. So at that point, I know you're not a serious buyer. And I had a couple of people that I took out for test drives where I almost had to reach over and turn the ignition switch off on the car. I had that happen a couple of times where I had to stop the person, tell them pull over, and I'm going to drive back to the dealership. I'm not selling you the car. I'm not going through any more of this Who Struck John with you, with the bad behavior and the insults and all of that other stuff. And my boss was like, I was like, no, I sell the most cars out of the dealership. I, I, I sold, 10 to 14 cars on average my last months with the dealership when I worked for Chrysler. And Chrysler was a wonderful company to work for. If you bought a Chrysler, you bought a Chrysler to drive for the rest of your life. But the fit and finish wasn't great. So you didn't buy a Chrysler if you wanted good resale value or anything like that. But those Chryslers back in the day were tanks. And then we got to notice that the new Chryslers had plastic bumpers, and that as a salesman, you couldn't lean on the hood of the car because it would dent the car. And we went out in the parking lot amid all of these land yachts, and we thought it was a joke coming from Lee Iacocca when we got the memo about the K cars. And what Chrysler did was they took all of the banners and stuff from the showrooms down, and they put up smaller signage and banners so that the smaller signs would look normal next to these little micro cars that they started selling. And I sold a woman a LeBaron K car. And the woman called me up on the phone. She said, my God, I got out on the highway and it's like being on a bicycle next to all of these water tankers and stuff. This car is so tiny. And at that point I said, well, you can trade it in, but you're going to take a hit on the value. I'm sorry. And I didn't do anything to cheat the woman. She picked out the car that she picked out, and it was a cute little LeBaron. But they had plastic bumpers, and it was true to their word that if you talked to a customer and you leaned on the hood would go blump up, and then you would have to open up the hood and take your hand and bang the dent out of the hood. Very soft metal that the cars were made out of. And believe me, they folded up like tin cans if they got in an accident, because I went to a body shop guy and I asked him about unibody cars. He didn't say a word. He held up a finger, and I'll never forget this. He took a Coca-Cola can and he put it on the ground, and then he stepped on the can very gently, like a ballerina, and the can held his whole body weight, no problem. Then he went like this with his finger, and he took his finger and he went bump and bumped a little teeny dent into the can, put it on the ground, and when he stepped on it with his weight, the can went whoosh immediately down to the ground flat. And he said that's the way a unibody car is, that you get into an accident one time, you're okay. But if you have that unibody car fixed and you get into a second accident, you're toast. So, because the old Chryslers, if you hit something, you just put a new bumper on it or a new fender. I sold a guy from a construction company a Chrysler New Yorker, and he was at a traffic light, and a Datsun 210 pickup truck was drinking his coffee, and he looked down to brush something out of his lap. He spilled the coffee. When he looked up, he ran into the back of the Chrysler. The Chrysler needed a new bumper and taillight. The guy with the Datsun pickup truck needed a new pickup truck. So back when the cars first were being small, you had all of these huge American cars that were running around like Sherman tanks. And that's why you had so many people get hurt in accidents when the imports started to come into the country. So, speaking of imports, this fifth column of migrants that's coming into the country at almost 1,000 a day in New York. New York is saying that they're thinking about passing a law to require residents of New York to house a migrant, and the government will pay people to have a migrant come live with your family. So I don't know how that's going to work out, fam. Especially since they're not checking out who these people are or if they have any criminal history or anything like that. I myself, being handicapped, would be up for having somebody come and stay with me if they were going to help me out around the house. But other than that, I would be worried about, going to bed and whether I was going to wake up in the morning with all of the MS-13 people that are pouring into the country and all that. I don't have a problem with migrants, and I can speak the better part of 3 languages well enough to be understood. But and see, in Europe, like countries like Germany, it's not unusual for a person in Germany to speak 4 or 5 different languages. So the thing that Americans have about the whole push 1 for English on your phone, and they're offended by that, it is what it is. And you can literally tell in a society where you are, because now you get a box of soap and English and Spanish are almost the same size letters on the box. You'll have one side be English and the other side of the box be Spanish. And now you'll have like a little bit of French on the side of the box, because we're a cosmopolitan society. And that just, it is what it is. And I don't have any problem. I never had a problem when I worked for various companies working for a person of color or a woman or something. Hey, Katrina, The last company I worked for, the man who replaced me came to America in a tractor trailer, and he said they were all cooking in the tractor trailer, and people were going to the bathroom in the corner of the tractor trailer, and women were getting groped, and the men figured they were going to DIE anyway, so they started getting with the other men, and they had this whole hellscape going on inside this tractor trailer as a guy came into America to eventually become my boss and work so many hours and work so hard as a young 28-year-old man that there were times when he would pass out at work from stress and everything. And I'll tell you, I was right behind him because I was working 16-hour days. And the reason the company let me go was I had a totally Hispanic crew in Virginia. And the problem was I was in Maryland at a meeting, and one of the men got cut from glass that some inconsiderate person threw in the trash without wrapping it in plastic or paper or duct tape. The man got cut so bad that every time his heart would beat, it would squirt out a stream of blood. And so they called me on the radio panicking that they needed an ambulance. So I said, "Where are you at?" You know, I'm talking to him in Spanish. So I asked, "Where are you at?" The problem was the crew couldn't read English and they couldn't read Spanish. So they didn't know what street they were on. So I'm on the radio panicking. I'm telling them to describe where they're at. Can you at least give me a letter off of the street? So he gave me W or M or something. And I started to figure where they could be, flipping through my map of the area. And so I called 911 and I said, "I need Virginia 911. Here's my situation." And they transferred me to Virginia. I said, "I have a trash truck in this area. The man's been cut and he's bleeding to DEATH, and they don't know where they are. I know that the truck is near the highway off of this street, so you should be able to see the truck. But an ambulance has got to get out there before the guy bleeds to DEATH." So I'm on the radio talking in Spanish. I'm on the other company radio talking in English with the office. And I'm on the phone talking to 911. And, you know, the panic and everything that I felt, that I couldn't let anybody else hear. So eventually I got an ambulance out to the truck and the guy lived. But the company said they needed a Hispanic, someone who was totally Hispanic rather than a mixed race family like me, to go out and oversee these men. I didn't fight it. I was like, well, that's fine. That's fine. I was heartbroken because, you know, I really had done my best to get this man saved, you know, get him an ambulance. And I used to do free stuff for my men, like get them safety glasses, which I could never get them to wear. And that wasn't my fault. And I spent a lot of my own money on the men when they needed food or something to drink. And the company got rid of me 2 weeks before Christmas. And they had a company meeting in the what we used to call the Shark Tank, which was a great big meeting table in this glass meeting room. And you would see people come out of the room and they'd be crying or something, or they'd be screaming. And we called it the Shark Tank. So they called me in, and the boss was at the top of the table, and he said, "We're giving your job to this other person, so we don't have anything here for you at the moment." So he was angry that I didn't get upset. And so I took my company car and I took it over to Fox Chevrolet. I told him, I said, "I want new brakes put on it. I want new tires. I want the car detailed. You know, I want the car to look brand new. So when I turn it in, they won't have anything to say about it." And when I turned in my uniforms, I had them cleaned and put in plastic and laid out on the conference table. Of course, nobody could wear them my size, but that didn't make any difference. And so one of the supervisors from his other company called me up and said, "We will take you over here at this branch of the company as a dispatcher." And so when I went to Fox to pick up the car to return it, I pointed at this Chevy Cavalier, a white Chevy Cavalier. I said, "I want a plain Jane Chevy Cavalier for two reasons. Because I live in South Baltimore and I want the car left alone. I want the crappiest white Chevy Cavalier with plastic hubcaps that you got." I gave him $5,000 down out of my cookie jar. So I had two cars to go home with. And so I had to return the one car and come back and get the No, that's not what I did. I took the Cavalier and then I left the other car up at the Chevy dealership and told the trucking company to have somebody pick it up when they were in the area. That's what I did. And so, in any case, the reason I got the white car is that the other company all had white company vehicles, and I wanted them to think that I was given a company car so I could park on the line with the other company cars. And I never told anybody one way or the other whether it was a company car or not. Everybody just assumed that the company had given me another car, and a white one this time. So I never showed my hand with anybody. And then the one guy from the other company, he didn't like me for whatever reason. He cut the grass, and he cut the grass so that the lawnmower, every pass that it went through the grass and the crap and everything onto my new white car. And by the time I came out, the acid in the grass had left grass burns on the paint. And so I had this white car that looked like it was made out of bamboo or something because it had all of these grass stains on the paint. And the guy thought that was the funniest thing in the world. You know, I never said anything to him, but we both looked at each other like, "I know you could have cut the grass to blow in another direction, but you made sure every time you cut the grass that you blow it on my car." You know, that kind of stuff that you go through with these people, you know, with these men, roughnecks. So I survived for like a year and a half at that company, and the boss told me to come to his office one day. So I came to his office. I stood in front of his desk waiting for him to get off the phone and tell me what he wanted. He said, "Don't you ever come into my office without my permission. When I tell you to come to my office, you're to come to the office, knock lightly on the door, and wait by the water cooler next to the door until I beckon you in." So I got up close to his face and I said, "Well, beckon this. Get somebody else to put up with your crap. because I'm through. I had $10,000 in the bank that I was going to coast on. So I got in my little white Cavalier, and I decided to start up my own sales company selling trash service agreements and bidding them out to the highest bidder, collecting the money myself, and then paying myself and the company. So I came up with the contracts that I wrote and all of this. When I went to the Dodge dealership in Laurel, the guy was very impressed with that. He said, "Why don't you take the sure thing and come with me, work with me at the Dodge dealership?" He didn't tell me that they had just lost their franchise and that they were running lower and lower and lower on cars. But the guy and I got along, and I decided that, well, I would take every car that they had on the lot and shine it up like a pretty penny. Make sure the oil was changed and the antifreeze was right and the tires were good and all that, and really give the customers a good used car and build a reputation. So that's what I did. And I lasted for a couple years there, buying used cars and fixing them up and reselling them. One woman traded in a van, and she had dogs. And the van was literally so dirty that she decided to trade the van in on another Dodge van. So she traded a very deluxe Caravan for another Dodge van that was nice but didn't have all the bells and whistles. So she went on her way, and I took her van, and there were needles, from diabetes. There were needles under the seats and dog poop on the carpet and all of that. I spent 2 days cleaning that van. And normally when a car dealership does that, they charge a couple $100 against the next deal to pay for the detailing. When I got done with the van, all it needed was a water pump, and it needed a little spot over the right rear wheel patched. So I filled that in with Bondo and painted it. And then I tried to get the dealership to replace the water pump, which they never would. So I discounted the car $1,500 and sold it with a bad water pump. The boss at the dealership did everything he could to discourage me, which was a shame, because I could have built that dealership up and run it for him and let him go back up to Pennsylvania and drive everybody up in Pennsylvania crazy, because everybody hated the guy. He had a company Christmas party one year, and so the mechanics all got together, and they said that they would order the most expensive thing on the menu to show their disdain for the boss. So they all ordered the double rack of ribs. Each mechanic ordered a $30 lunch. And so when the waitress came to me, I ordered a hamburger without the 10 cents for the cheese. And the hamburger came with a little pile of fries and a little cup of coleslaw. And I got a glass of water with a slice of lemon in it. And they were like, "Is that all you want?" And I was like, "Fellas," I said to myself, "Fellas, I'm not playing your game." So my lunch was $4.98. And everybody else's lunch cost the boss hundreds of dollars. And he never, of course they were dumb, he never offered to buy a company lunch after that, because they'd shown each other where they stood. But I had a lot of good times selling cars, made a lot of friends, and never cheated anybody. And again, like I said, Chrysler was a wonderful, Chrysler was a wonderful company to work for. And I really would wish I was young again to kind of relive those days as I languish here in my bed, watching TV and living vicariously through other people on TV. So, any case, fam, I'm going to go. I love you. I care about you. The good Lord cares about you more. Pop's outie. A troll just jumped on the on the live stream. We were having this good time hanging out, and this troll has jumped on the live stream to decide to overload the message board and spoil it for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and cut things short. Pop out.